Well, hello, hello. We're back again for another Other Ink Thursday, and I'm Matthew Orr of Wet Ink Games, and I am joined today on my call by Adam Watson, the digital learning consultant at the Ohio Valley um, Educational
Education.
Cooperative.
Yes, that's you got
OVEC. I
it.
tried to say all of it too much. So hello, Adam. And also you found some other things and you were gonna talk about everything that you did, but that's sort of your title for like that's how you pay your bills, right? Is the OVEC.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. And it's a great place and a way to pay my bills, I should add. It's a wonderful job. I'm very blessed. Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking some time out of your day. I had to go through your system and like book your time because you're a consultant, and so you sent me to like you like book some time and for this interview. It was not the usual process. I'm usually much more like hey, are you free at this certain time? I could do evenings if you need to. It's a bunch of emails,
Yeah.
and you're very professional and sent me like here's my schedule. Book a time slot in my day.
It's come in very handy in my work where as I'm sure you've encountered, it just takes that one back and forth conversation of someone who's like, "Are you free Tuesday at 1? No. Are you free Thursday at 9? No. Are you free Wednesday at 3? No." It's like, "Oh my gosh." Like, yeah, let's look, how can we make this a little bit, especially when it's a friend and like it's within an office and you can share calendars, that's an easy. But when it's someone externally, it's hard. I mean, if we could save 15 minutes of our life, let's do
Perfect.
it.
So we matched up. Here we are. We're talking about it. I just got back from Gamma Expo. Well, got back. I mean, it's in town. It was in I'm in Louisville right now, and it was in Louisville, and that was a good time. And that's where I met you. Like it
Last
was
year?
in March last year. So
Yeah.
it's March. What is it? March 3rd today. So it's maybe almost literally a year since I met you in passing at last year's Gamma, and so. Also, there's some timing stuff that will there's a we're gonna get to the end of the interview. We're talking about your telethon. Like, I need to know about
Yeah.
how the telethon in 2025 works. We'll find out. Um,
That sounds good.
but before we get to all that, I like to set up everything we're going to talk about and then go backwards and say what we start with. So I assume you like games because you came to Gamma last year and you've got this education RPG initiative that you started, and so
Hmm.
where do games start with you? Like, what is your obviously like children play with like stones and sticks and call it a game and stuff like that. But like, what was your first like the thing that sticks into your mind is like, oh no, these are like products that are like manufactured and there's rules that come on a sheet. And what was your first like experience with games that are like as like manufactured games that aren't just like play pretend? Where do games start for you in that way?
That's what a wonderful question. Going back to the state of things. Well, I will say that there's a little bit of a prequel to that, I suppose, which is like so many people of my age, I'm 51. One of those seminal moments, and there's a phrase that could probably become trite, but it's very true, I feel like. One of those moments in me that were a crucible moment for me was when I went and saw Star Wars
Mm.
and saw the original A New Hope. I was in Las Vegas at the time. My father was in the Air Force, so that's where we were stationed. And we went to a drive-in theater. And the only reason that I know it was 1978 and it was a re-release of Star Wars is because my parents gave me Star Wars action figures, which, as many people who probably listen to this know, the Star Wars action figures didn't come out for a while, right? You got
Mhm.
those little cards at Christmas saying coming soon. So this is about a year later. Um, and when I had those action figures, it was really a moment of, I want to create a world where I can be these characters and exist and tell stories. And that was, and of course we all do. We all did with action figures and play. But there was something settled, like how can we formalize this process? I could have said that at 4 or 5 years old, but that's probably what I was kind of leaning toward. So fast forward, it's the mid 80s and the golden heyday of role playing games. And a family member had knew that I was a big fan of science fiction and said, I have this game, Star Frontiers from TSR. And I really think you'd probably enjoy it. And I thought, okay, well, how does it work? And it's like, well, you tell stories, but there are rules and there's dice you roll. And I said, well, that sounds intriguing. Again, not the word I probably used at 10. I remember the tactile things about it. I remember the it was a percentile dice a game, so 10 sided were important in the game. And I remember this back in the day where you got the white crayon and
I was gonna
you
ask. I
you
was
know
gonna ask if you got the white crayon because I
white
think
crayon.
I had the
Yes.
Marvel superhero game in
Also
my
a
own
favorite.
childhood from TSR, and it. I
Yes.
remember that it came with the white crayon.
The great old white crayon. So I played it and I was
And that's
hooked.
for the youngs in the audio. That's so you could the dice were not printed with an enameled number. You got to
Yeah,
color the wax onto the groove. The dice were grooved but not enameled. So you got the white crayon was to color the white into the die numbers so they were easier to
that's
read.
right. You
Um,
kids today, you just don't
Dice
understand.
are you know you've been to Gen Con, like dice are just phenomenally
Beautiful.
produced now. Just in it just
Unbelievable.
I mean n there are such glorious dice made these days. But
And
they did start.
customizable dice. What's
Oh, yeah,
that's a
right.
world that amazing, amazing.
I I
We live in good times when it
I
comes to at least
talked
customizable
to
dice.
somebody at Gamma. This is we've gone off on a rabbit trail now. I
Yeah.
talked to somebody at Gamma who was like, "We can print your logo like in the plastic of the die if you would like." And he was showing me the samples, and they were like, flowers that were on every facet of the die because it's just however they're made is just they print the die whatever you want. Put the cover of your books on your die, and I'm like, I
A,
Okay,
a
I'll add
lot.
your card to my stack here. I don't know if I need that, but like it's fascinating that it can be done. Um,
It's an amazing world. So I that was my first role playing game,
mm,
tabletop role playing game, and it definitely hooked me. Fell in love with that game, great game, and it was my gateway game, I guess you
mhm.
could say. From there, I fell into Advanced Dungeons and Dragons at the time, AD&D, and then evolved and rolled out Steve Jackson Car Wars. That was a fun one that we played, and all the fun expansions with that. Marvel Superheroes came a few years later. Definitely a
Mhm.
fun one. I loved that one from the TSR days. I remember getting the James Bond Victory Games. James Bond, a huge James
Okay.
Bond fan, still am.
That's not one I know. I don't know that one. Is that
It was really interesting. Some of these games, I should say, some I played, some as players, some as a game master. But at least as many that I played were ones that they sat in boxes. Like I just loved them. I loved the world or the
yeah.
license or the thing. I loved to read about them, read about the rule books, even if I didn't actually have a chance to play them. Another one was FAFSA's Star Trek game, role playing game. Again, Star Trek fan as well. And there was a full circle moment, West End Games, near the end of this golden run. They had a Ghostbusters game, a D6 system, and then they came out with the Star Wars role-playing game, which
Yeah.
I mean, my head almost exploded, as you can probably see from the story that I just shared. Like, wow, here it is. And again, it's a different world. It's hard to explain to people today when you can flip, turn on Disney Plus and there's 15 television shows of Star Wars. This is
Yeah.
1987. If there was a nadir moment in Star Wars, like Return of the Jedi was years old at that point. No one thought there was any gas left in that tank. I mean, they were
You
probably
got the
selling the
you
rights
got
to
the
Star
Ewoks
Wars for a dollar.
cartoon.
Well, all right, that's true. Creatively,
Right. I
yeah,
mean, yeah, an indie of Star Wars, sure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was like, this is exciting. And then, of course, the chance to play Star Wars in the world of Star Wars was all the way back to those action figures, right? Like here it is, here's a system, here's a codification of that. So I was really into the role playing games for the years, and then what happened is what happens to so many things, and so many, especially about tabletop role playing games. The years go on, and it became harder and harder to find a group of friends who'd want to
Sure.
play for a certain day at a certain time, certainly in any consistent way. So that just started to fade away, and all of those 1980s role playing, thankfully, I kept. I still have them, which was I didn't keep a lot, but I did keep those in a bin. Those just kind of ended up becoming a tub, a bin that went around with me in my lifetime. But and every now and then, out of curiosity, I'd break it open and look at it. But I thought that the time of role playing games was behind me, or at least so I
Hmm.
thought. So that was my genesis moment. That was my moment of starting that travel.
Well, sure. So, how I mean that I was about to ask that very question. Like, what did you have you stayed with gaming regularly this whole time, or was there a fallow period? So, I mean, where you are now with you've got an organization and you're using ice, you're doing some work with games now, and will um, what brought you back to games? Like, is there a
Yeah,
game that like you just saw it on the shelf and you said you had to get it and you had to play it and you come and play this game with me? Or is it, I don't know, what ended the fallow period, I guess, is the question.
that's yeah, great question. There's a combination of a couple of things. I'll probably tell you two key ones. The one was I never really got tabletop role playing games out of my system. I just try to find different ways of how at least that mentality or that system of play could come in. And here's where I would mention that I'm a public school educator. I'm in my 20th year in public school education. So even as a classroom teacher, I've tried to find some snippets to bring into the classroom of elements of play of role playing, and so I did little snippets of that. Saw articles about people doing similar things. So it was always kind of on the periphery.
Right.
But in terms of actual gameplay, there was probably two critical elements that really fired it up. One was I have two daughters, and my youngest daughter had texted me while I was out of town at a conference, and she said, "Dad, do you know about Dungeons and Dragons or D&D? And I don't know quite the right term." And I was like, do I know about Dungeons and Dragons? Yes. My goodness. And she said, well, I'd be interested in playing.
Mm,
Do you have the books? Do you have things? Now, this is a couple years ago. So, fifth edition had flourished and blown up. But of course, that was way past my years of knowing and playing D&D. So the short answer was I didn't have the rule books for the latest edition of D&D. But boy, oh boy,
they're
all you had to
they're
do is ask, right?
they're
Bought
easily
the
accessible.
and I bought the core rule set and went all in and learned and read and revamped myself in 5e, ran a thing for my daughter and my nephew Roland, my daughter Aria, and we had a great time. And it of course reawakened, the sleeper must awaken, to use another sci-fi reference. Uh, and I've just gone all in since then. I've bought certainly some things. One of my favorite publishers is probably Free League Publishing right now. They
Sure.
have some fun licenses, but the Alien and Blade Runner, another two movies that I really love.
Yeah.
Dragonbane's great. Anyway, so I've been buying and
Yeah.
opening myself up. That was one. The other one is that I didn't know this for years. Apparently, it's been there, but that Gen Con, the great gaming conference in Indianapolis for the last couple of decades, which I used to read in my Dragon magazine. I used to open it up, and this is, of course, very pre-internet, right? You'd see this insert for like the upcoming Gen Con, all the sessions that you could sign. I mean, mail in your check. I mean, it was
Yeah,
all
I
the
was gonna say
things.
it's probably got like a mail-in thing at the tear off the bottom of the page to
Right,
like
right,
sign
right.
up, you know?
It was very old school. Loved Dragon magazine. Loved reading about Gen Con. I thought, boy, wouldn't that be wonderful? To go to a conference and just play games, see games, visit booths. But
Lake Geneva,
young Adam.
Wisconsin. Where's that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it just might as well have been a billion years away, or a billion miles away, rather. But then, very recently, just the last couple of years, I didn't know until recently that they have a trade day, which is the day before the 4 days of the official conference, where it's education, librarians, game shop owners. It's much more of that mindset. And trade day became an opening. It was like, well, this is the heart of what I would love. I'd love to see the intersection of education and tabletop role playing games and meet and see and learn from others. So I went. And so that just really it brought all the things together. It brought my education together. It brought an opportunity to see new games, to play some games, role-playing games, but also some board games too. So those two things in the last few years were definitely probably the catalyst that really
Yeah.
got it back. And now I should add, I guess, in closing to all that, that there was an educator who was willing to be a dungeon master of a 5e campaign, along with several other players. Would I be willing to play? I'm like, would I? And so I've I've been doing that for about a year and a half or so,
Yeah.
and at least once a month, and that's glorious. It's the most regularly playing I've ever been in my life, probably about role playing games. Even back in its 80s heyday, it was catch when catch can.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm in hog heaven. It's great.
So what's your character? What are you playing right now?
Okay, so we play again. It's 5e. It's an Eberron world, and I am playing a rogue halfling called Alonius Archfoot, who is an archaeologist.
Right.
And so it's kind of like imagine like a halfling version of Indiana Jones, right?
Sure.
Always, grumbling about this should be in a museum, maybe willing to steal a few things in order to get it for the greater good,
Right,
has a
right.
fedora,
There
and
you go.
rides a mini stegosaurus called Shadowplate. That's my steed. So,
All of this sounds very 5e. All of this sounds very 5e and
yes,
in all
yes,
the best and as an indie publisher, we always have like a little have a little chip on your shoulder about 5e because it's had so much
I
success.
understand.
But in all the best and worst ways, that sounds like 5e.
There you go. There you
Uh,
go. I
uh,
claim it. Yes.
yes. All right. So I do want to shift gears a little bit into you mentioned
Please.
your work in education and stuff like that. So like what is your work and then where now that you talked about going to trade day and like what are those conversations that you were having talking to game people and game manufacturers and stuff like that, but like what is the education side, like what do you classroom teaching for years you said, so like
Mhm.
what's your subject or what subjects did you do and then like how did that transition into being a consultant and what kind of work do you do as a consultant, like what is your what when other people who are more serious, when other people book your time, what are you telling them?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I started as a classroom teacher, high school English
High
mainly.
school English. Okay.
Uh-huh. And one of those things that I was very happy and excited to do in my high school teaching years was a myth and legends class. Mythology, Joseph Campbell, that could be a whole other run of a conversation of us getting stuck into because I love that. So that was probably one of the instances where I was able to try to figure out and play. It's an elective class, and there's scholastic and academic needs and standards, but an elective like a myth and legends class, you have a little bit more freedom. And so that was an opportunity to kind of play a little bit in that game-based learning space. And probably is about that point in time where I really started thinking about and reading up on and trying to learn more about game-based learning and all the things that that falls into. What's a design of a good game? Um, how could games create opportunities to further academic, durable skills, social emotional learning? The Yeah,
This isn't just playing like the version of Mare Nostrum where they added in like phoenixes and krakens, right? I mean, you this is this that's you got to do better than that, I guess, to meet those standards.
right, right. Well, and it's a kind of a question of whether it's a different way to deliver prep you for content, or is it something about the process that tackles or attaches itself to learning and practicing those skills. So this also is where you kind of get into game-based learning versus, say, gamification. Gamification
Mm.
isn't necessarily bad, but it's those elements of games that you might see or find or experience, but aren't necessarily, they come just short of playing an entire game. So a perfect example that I always go to is like the Shoppers Reward Program, right? Like you get groceries, you get so many points. Those points can be redeemed for discounts off your fuel. And as simple as that is, that's a gaming context or a gamification context of
Yeah, yeah.
gamifying your experience of, ooh, look at me, I'm purchasing and I can get ahead and level up. That kind of stuff can happen in education. Probably the most classic example is that a lot of schools have systems, digital or analog, where if you do well, you do positive behaviors, you get rewarded with points, and those points can add up and accrue. And at some point, you cash them in for some kind of store, whether that's virtual or an actual, thing
Yeah.
that you get some little tickets and trinkets.
We
So,
we had
gamification, game-based learning, yeah.
yeah. In fifth grade, I think it was, maybe sixth grade, sixth grade. I think we got to make our own we got to make a car out of construction paper and it could be whatever you wanted. And it was up on the wall at the very top of the classroom and one cinder block per whatever was the movement. So that everything throughout the year was like all of these things. You could get a block of movement if you turn in your paper first or whatever. So
Oh,
like
love it.
there was the race around the everybody's cars were racing around the top of the classroom for
That's really cool. I love that.
I mean it was fun, but it's also like you know you get 5 blocks if you like write do this extra credit or thing and write a story or what it was
Right.
like it was all geared to it, it wasn't like that fun, but it is like that kind of thing you're talking about. It's a gamification of
It's a
like, hey,
gamification. It's a
we
gamification.
want you to do this. It has nothing to do with cars, and you're just doing.
You're not learning about cars.
You're not
Yes.
you're not learning about
Yes.
cars. You're not like doing extra. It's like it's not a unique assignment that relates to anything that you're doing. It's just like if you're
Right.
quiet, you get a block. If you're
Right.
the
You're
first to
compliant.
complete
Yeah.
your math paper, you get a block. Like all of those sort of
Fair.
things. They're just it's just a layer on top of um,
Yeah.
the other activities that were happening in the classroom. Um,
Absolutely.
but it
So,
could, yeah. So anyway, so that's the gamification side, which is not
yeah,
the
yeah.
as integrated, right?
As integrated or as deep. I mean, you're not going to have
Right.
as rich an experience or opportunities if you didn't actually play a game. But again, I don't want to set a hierarchy of good versus bad. It's all about meeting
Okay.
your
Okay.
objectives, right?
Sure. Sure.
Um, so that was a process. Game-based learning was certainly a big part of what I was really interested in, along with education technology. From an early start in my teaching career, I really was fascinated by that. I guess I've always loved tech, but finding ways that, again, it was meaningful in a classroom.
Right.
So those journeys kind of, intertwined as I went through my years. The next job was at a district at Shelby County Public Schools. I was a teacher in Bullitt County and Oldham County schools, which is these are local school districts, all Kentucky. Shelby County I went to next, and I was a digital learning coordinator there, and that was helping them with their one-to-one initiative that they had started. This is back years ago at this point, where they thought of like, we're going to act, wait a minute, we're going to give every kid a device. Yeah, Chromebooks.
Hmm.
What's that? Like, this is early days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And leading through that, helping staff with professional development and managing and doing professional development with that. So that process happened. And then that came into my current work, where I work with OVEC and skipping ahead just slightly. First off, OVEC, Ohio Valley Educational Cooperative. There are 8 such organizations in Kentucky. Many states have a version of this, even if they don't call it a cooperative. It's a state education agency in other places. As a cooperative, districts basically become members voluntarily. They don't have to, but members regionally come together. And by being a member of OVEC, these districts get our services basically at nominal or no cost. They have big, huge programs that our cooperative runs. They run things called Head Start, for example, for a lot of places and schools where that's the preschool stuff. And by helping to manage the purse strings and following the paperwork, the money flows through OVEC, but it's to help the district. Like that's just less for them to worry about. Like give us a space, we'll staff it with the people, bring the kids, kind of thing. So that's a large part of their program. We have over 400 employees. But there's also smaller portions like the members of the teams that I'm on where it's about professional development and consultation. And my gig, as it were, is digital learning consultant. So the main part of that gig is just that. It's how can I help people do things with digital learning, artificial intelligence, blended learning, hardware education technology stuff to help the learning experience be more effective, more joyful for the adults and the students.
Eh,
So yeah,
Uh, I, I I'm creating perhaps a bit of a straw man here that you can demolish, but it's like you talk about digital learning or whatever, and I'm like, I, I, it's been a long time since I've been in a classroom, and so I think I mentioned before the started recording. I did do student teaching, and I did like do
yeah,
education program back in the day. So like
yeah.
but that was a very long time ago. Gosh, it's almost 20 years since I graduated, which is wild. But not quite. Anyway, the point is that it's been a long time since I've done this, but like you say, like, oh, integrating technology into the classroom, and I'm like, so you're gonna turn learning into like an ARG where like people have to like do some, national treasure stuff. Like you set up a game where they're like researching things to answer questions on and then it spells out. I mean, that is again, that's a straw man that I'm constructing that then you can demolish if that's not the way it is.
Gotcha.
But like that
There's
that's
certainly
that's what it sounds like you help teachers figure out how to do when you say that like you're using these online resources and stuff like that.
Well, there
But
are there are that would be the ultimate expression of both passions of game-based learning and digital learning. I would say that on most days, people are just looking for the digital learning help. So, artificial intelligence, again, that's a huge topic, one that's a lot of people are interested in, and leadership in just at the classroom level. That what is AI? How can it help my life be more effective? Can it help students learn better? All these good questions. What's the ethics of using AI? lots of hard questions. And it's not
Yeah.
like I have all the answers. I'm not pretending to be that person, but I can certainly lead you through the experience of asking the questions, share resources that have given various answers to some of those questions, tools upon which they could use. That's kind of my main bread and butter of my day to day. Now, there are also, through my experience, and I know we're going to be talking probably about KyEdRPG in a minute here, but the through my last couple of years, I've certainly met with people that are leaders of some really interesting and really awesome ways of bringing games, particularly tabletop role-playing games, into education. Their stories have helped inspire other people who said, I'm really curious. I heard that, or I went to your PD. I would like more help in that. And like so many things in life, there's aspects where that can be helped by a digital learning tool. So there's just this virtuous circle. There's a lot of the snake eating its tail about some of that stuff as far as one leading into the other. In a perfect world, there's an opportunity where the game-based learning meets the digital, and that becomes a great conversation to have with some teachers or leadership around that. But one thing I always say about anything, whether it's digital tools or certainly game-based learning, and very certainly tabletop role-playing games in education, is you have to pick your moment of entry, and you don't have to go whole hog. In fact, there could be aspects of tabletop role-playing games in education that you might decide to do just short of playing a whole game that could have value, because between the objectives and goals you hope to meet, this would meet that, right? So it doesn't have to be a all or nothing. It doesn't have to be a full-blown D&D system. There are certainly other systems that you could use. And frankly, whatever the system may be, you're a classroom teacher who needs to adapt and scaffold. So don't feel ever, and because that's usually the first misconception I usually address when I talk about this or do PD sessions or conference sessions that I lead, don't feel that you have to get this one system and this book that's like 357 pages and read and master that before you ever dare to try to do a thing in a classroom. Like that would just be too much. No one would ever
Right.
do that, right? You can pull way back, and frankly, if you have a system, scaffold it, simplify it. Don't do, what's your objective? Don't let the game or the memorization or mastering of a game system get in the way of the lesson or the unit's objective. And so that's you're getting a little spiel as far as my first and major piece of advice is
Yeah.
don't let the game run you. You run the game.
Mm. Uh, that's good. That's good. I actually went to a session at Gamma because I just got back from Gamma, so it's top of mind. But it was about edu it was basically like how to design games that teachers will actually use in their classroom.
Yeah.
And it was mostly focused on board games, which uh, I guess were easier to talk about. But some of the stuff that you just said is stuff that was in this panel. The two teachers who were presenting were talking about like you have so little instruction time. I have like 45 minutes between the bells, and like
Right.
I cannot spend 30 minutes reading the rules of the game to the students. You have to be
Right.
like you have to be like it works like this, and then I'm done with 3 minutes of explanation, and they're off to do the game. And that's just the realities of a classroom. Like, and so like you can't
Which
like I
is
think that
tough.
echoes what you were saying about like don't feel like you have to use it all.
Well, and go back to the board game thing. I think it's a great point. I love the world of the complexity of the world of role playing or board games. Some of the ones that are out now that sometimes it's blurry, right? Like some of these board games feel like role playing games,
Right.
frankly. But here's the bottom line. To your point, here's where the shift gets lost. So there's a whole explanation of rules, and if you feel like you have to spend 27 minutes, yeah, you're locked. Forget it. It's just not. It's not worth the investment. If I was doing this
Hmm.
for 8 days, maybe 27 minutes, half of my period on day one, but that's not usually the way it works. The second part is the setup, and I mean that in all the aspects of it. I've played many of recent modern board games where I feel like it's 27 minutes of just setting up the pieces and the
Yeah. Yeah.
cards, and then and then finally, you get ready to play. Well, there's the setup, but there's also something that happens about 27 seconds into those board games. Where's the horse?
Hmm.
Has anyone seen the horse?
Yeah.
These
Where's
pieces, right? There's just too many pieces they're going to get lost. And then if you
right.
lose critical elements of the game and you can't even play it, and by the way, the game cost $100 to begin with, I mean, you can see all the problems, which is why tabletop role-playing games, I think, is the secret sauce. At the end of
Right.
the day, it's a co-created story. It can be a lot of theater of the mind. Yes, there's dice, but there's digital versions of that if you're afraid to lose some dice. you can get into that relatively quickly, and it's not like it takes a heavy weight of setup, and it's not like you have to count for all the horses and the swords and the deck of cards and that, it's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Oh, right, which is why I wanted, I as a mostly a role-playing game publisher, I was there to hear about role-playing games in the classroom, and they talked about board games, and
Yeah.
um which, whatever, it's fine. The audience of Gamma is mostly board game oriented people anyway, because there's so many more
Players.
board game players and publishers than there are.
Everyone's played. Listen, here's what happens. Has anyone here played Monopoly? And
Uh-huh.
of course, 99% of the people raise their hand. So you can create schema really quick. If you say how many people play tabletop role-playing games, far less hands. You can say how many people have at least heard of Dungeons and Dragons. Now you see,
Yeah, yeah,
because of Stranger Things and all the things, you see more
it's true.
hands, and then you can build on that. Well, role-playing games, blah blah blah. Um, but you're right. It's the thing is that I point out though, which I think is interesting, in again goes why tabletop role-playing than maybe a board game. Which I'm not saying it's an either or. It doesn't have to be a false dilemma. It
Yeah,
can be
yeah,
all
yeah.
the things. But most a lot of modern games are getting away from this, but the vast majority of board games are competitive and it's a winner. There's a winner at the end, right?
Right, right. This is another
Versus,
topic that they talked about. So yeah,
yeah, tabletop role-playing games are collaborative, and that's where it
mhm.
creates a lot more opportunity where if the conflict, it can be externalized, we're together against this goal or obstacle or call it a monster versus, haha,
Forbidden
I got
Island. They like
$10,000, I
Forbidden
win.
Island a whole lot,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which is a
Anyway,
cooperative escape the island. You got to work together
yeah,
to escape the collapsing island. The island is sinking, and you have to get off the island, and it's a
yeah,
collaborative game,
yeah.
board game. So, uh, anyway, you see, like a lot of what you're saying is like not to criticize you, but like this is like you're in sync with other people who are saying these same things.
Yeah,
I heard a lot of what you're saying just a few days ago at one of the panels, because
yeah.
I think this is where trying to bring these tools. You talked about digital tools before, like these sort of tools, like a toolkit for teaching conflict resolution, or a toolkit for exploring sort of an empathy engine sort of thing. I mean, I know you talked about the huge
Love
games. I
that
mean,
phrase. Empathy engine. I love that
yeah.
phrase. Yes.
That, it's not perfect, right? But like you play something like I'm thinking of, because it's history, and I just was, again, I some of these things are top of mind. Jason Morningstar's Night Witches is a role-playing game where you play the women pilots who bombed the German lines
Hmm.
during World War II and stuff like that. And so there's missions, and those are stressful, but most of the game is playing like, what is that like to be a frontline soldier in World War II? And so that's like, and the sort of stresses, and your friend has not come back from the mission, and how do you deal with that, and your relationships with each other as the group of pilots who's doing this stuff. It's that's what I mean by empathy engine, where like this is not an experience that most high schoolers or middle schoolers will have experienced, right? And so to
It's a
give
great
them
empathy engine. Yeah.
give them the tools to kind of vicariously experience the conditions of war and having to make hard choices and seeing friends die and stuff like that, can put them into that context, and understand what that war was at least partially about, to
Yeah.
experience it, right? And so that's a toolkit that you can bring into a classroom that is different than, you know, you could watch the movie. What's the movie called? Oh, the snipers in Stalingrad. I forget what the name of that movie was.
Oh, like
Enemy at the Gates.
enemy at the
Enemy at the
gates.
Gates.
Yes. I love that movie.
Amazing
Yeah.
movie, amazing movie. But that's going to take your whole week, because you can only watch that and it's not safe for schools because there's some adult material in there. But
But
you
well,
can.
well, Matthew, what you point out too, though, is, and this is very critical, it's the difference between passive and active.
Hmm.
Like, as an English teacher, I love reading. I think reading's important. So let's make sure I say that right at the beginning. And I believe that reading gives you a window, or perhaps even the word escape into another world. I think all these things are possible. But even active reading, really engaged reading, is has a passivity to it, perhaps. Certainly, watching a video like back here is like, well, I mean, it could be
Right.
really interesting. It might have its moments, but it's again passive. Now, gaming is active. And so the difference in all of those things is it's reading about Stalingrad, it's watching a movie, even a well-made movie about Stalingrad, and then the difference between those things and actively role playing in those scenarios where you can really what does it feel? It's the old thing of walking a mile in someone's shoes, the
Sure.
empathy engine phrase that I keep harking, but I love it. Tabletop role playing games are empathy engines. They can create situations where what would it feel like if you were dot dot dot. And one thing I'd also point out really quick that I want to point out is social studies is a really easy lift. In fact, when people talk, they go straight to the things that you mentioned. You know, hey, there's a battle, there's a war, medieval and knights, and okay. And then these are all true, but those are probably the easiest things to think of. And the difference in the conversation, I think, is skins and bones. Um, we can really skin a game any way we want. It could be
Mm.
Stalingrad, it could be medieval times.
Right.
But what's probably more important is to thinking about the bones. Once you have a gaming mechanic, perhaps simplified, that works, you can do whatever you want with it. It doesn't even have to be war. It doesn't have to be history. It could be living a part of a book. And instead of, let's role play what it feels like to be in Pride and Prejudice. And Good Society is an actual tabletop role playing game, by the way, just to throw
Sure.
that name out there. Um,
And
uh,
since Sentai and
yeah.
Sensibility has just come out, where
Yes, yes.
you're doing the Jane Austen stuff, but also with battle suits and giant robots. So
Whatever works, right?
right.
But the point is that you can create situations where you can play the scenes of the book or play as the characters, learning about what is it, getting into the minds of the characters quite literally. And maybe it's offset by, these are almost like what if multiverse moments. And then it's like, well, let's see what the prime, the sacred timeline, which is the book. How did she take care of that in the actual book itself? These are options and opportunities.
Yeah.
So A, doesn't always have to be fighting. And B, there are games where it's an easy lift when if you have a fantasy role-playing game and you're talking about medieval times, you only have to shift just a smidge and you're there, right? But you could use the mechanics of a D&D or a Dragonbane or pick your favorite system, and that system, put different people on it and they're doing lots of different things. And frankly, that's one of the things that's probably the power of 5e, especially, right? Like there's everyday heroes which is more cinematic perhaps, but pretty much, run of the mill kind of humans, maybe at the very outermost limit of what we consider normal, doing things, but within that game system. And then on another side, you could have something like Nations and Cannons, which is independently produced 5e supplement that talks about the Revolutionary War. Uses the 5e system, but there you go. So skins and bones, like the bones is
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
mechanics, the skin can be almost anything.
Yeah. That's an interesting way to think about it. I mean, that is sort of the it's not exactly germane to the conversation, but there's another person I talked to recently that really gets into the economic system behind the games, and like when he was explaining how he sets up his world or whatever, and he's like, okay, so if there's a vampire in a castle, like what are the resources that have to support a castle full of vampires, and like
Ah,
it's like
yes, I love
he's
that.
talking about the economics of like how a
Run the
medieval
numbers, yeah.
feudal society would work, and like therefore how much territory has to be under the vampire's control to support the lifestyle that's going on, and and then so like the influence further and further out from like vampire lord in a castle, which is a very fantasy sort of thing, becomes very mundane about like the medieval feudal economy of like how much woad you have to grow in such and such an area in order to support
Yeah.
all the tapestries that are in the vampire lord's castle. It's like he was, and so
But you but
different
you-
systems produce different economies, and you can study sort of economics
but
in that way.
what you pointed out though, which is brilliant, is thinking of 12-year-old Matthew, 12-year-old Adam. And I'm in a classroom and when I hear about economics, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? There's a vampire lord. Okay. Like what let's talk about that. It's the same mechanics, the same academics, the same
Mm,
standards, the same numbers that have to be crunched, but there's an engagement level. And sometimes engagement can be flash and dash, and one must be careful. I never want to play games for game's sake unless it's an extracurricular club on the side and it's just for
sure.
funsies. Although I think you get social emotional learning and durable skills out of that too.
Yeah, I think that's
But
going to be our
but
transition point, but finish up what you were
yeah.
saying there.
No, bottom line though is that here is something where that has the lean in moment for a 12-year-old. Like,
Mm.
what is 13 what is medieval? Oh, vampire lord, you say.
What if he's a vampire
And
lord?
that's great. You have to use all the things when you're a teacher of classroom. How do you find things that are authentic? How do you find real life examples? And how do you engage students? in a world that they've, even if they don't play tabletop role-playing games, and I'm talking and preaching to the choir here, but the whole architecture of video games, they know all the language. They know what
Mm,
levels are. They know what
yeah,
experience points are. They get it. They
yeah,
just may have not played it in an analog fashion.
right,
So
right.
let's lean in and find ways to tap into that in their interest level.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So you mentioned extracurricular clubs that are just playing the games for just the games. And so that is a question that I wanted to ask you in your work over the years with OVEC and teachers and talking about resources like that. What is your perspective on like, because I hear other teachers who are they're game fans and sometimes creators and also teachers, and they're like, oh, I had to get another classroom involved so that there were enough places for all the kids who wanted to play after school D&D to play
Right.
after school D&D, and so I what is your view of that? Are you hearing that there is a lot of interest from middle schoolers and high schoolers for playing games and support from the teachers to sponsor those after school clubs and stuff like that? Is that what is your view of that sort of phenomenon of?
Well, in what I've read, what I've seen personally and through books and articles, what you described is absolutely accurate. I think that again, gateway game of being maybe Dungeons and Dragons, Stranger Things. What's that? It was my daughter. She loved the movie. She loved Stranger Things, which made her aware of Dungeons and Dragons. She had some friends also interested, so the conversation was up. Let's play. I think that you're absolutely right. I think the numbers are definitely going up. I think that some of those things have led to interesting possibilities. Here's a quick anecdote. There is a, group of people that have a podcast called Teachers in the Dungeon, Dan Ream and Tom Gross. And I had the privilege of being a guest, then finally meeting them in person at Gen Con. But the story I want to present is that they had a game club that was growing so big they didn't have enough Dungeon Master Game Master friends. And so from that need, they started creating a summer RPG camp. And its main purpose started off really frankly, they just needed to develop some Dungeon Master Game Masters. Like they just needed some people to be able to run games of their club. What that has created, of course, is a groundswell of interest and started to filter down even into classrooms in their high school in Illinois. So it's all the things, I think that from the margins, from the margins to the mainstream is a phrase that I sometimes use, and I think you see some of that where the culture could be starts with the club that's after school, but then a teacher's like, how can I take an aspect of that and bring it into the classroom experience? And that's really where KyEdRPG um, really leaned in because I
Yeah.
knew, and there are a lot of those clubs around, and a lot more than there ever has been, but I wanted more than that. That's great, and I love it. But are people using it in the classroom? And the short answer is yes. And I was able to find people and celebrate them on the KYED RPG website, in blogs and social media as far as people that are doing that. And I'm very blessed that even in Kentucky, in the bluegrass, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, that we were able to find people up and down the highway doing that. Like there are certainly examples and stories in other states, but it's amazing and wonderful that there are people that are just one district over. So
When you say
it's
up
a
and
good
down the highway,
movement.
you mean 71 that goes between Louisville and
Yeah,
Cincinnati, right?
exactly. That kind of highway. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard that phrase before. I mean, is it specifically that highway, or you just mean all the
Just
state
in general.
highways? Okay.
Well, what I tell people is that if you find friends in the hallway or the highway that's relative driving distance or just three doors down, that is going to have a much stronger connection for you than someone that's doing it in California. If you're from
Sure.
Kentucky, for example,
Yeah, yeah,
for a variety of reasons, I think there's a feeling that, oh, if it can happen here, it can happen in my classroom. But there's also just the practical aspect of there's something, even if it's just electronic, maybe it isn't necessarily physically visiting a moment, but the option that you could perhaps go a half hour away and walk into a classroom to see some of this stuff in action is attractive. Teachers really love the opportunity to be like, I need to see it and smell it.
yeah. Hmm.
I believe you. I love your resources, but I want to see it actually
Yeah.
happen. And same thing with me. I heard some people, who had shared stories, and I'm like, I got to check this out. And until I went and saw it, I mean, not that I didn't believe, but it was like, wow,
It's different. It's different.
it is different. And it's been an amazing journey to be able to see some of those things in action. Because what I did not want for my website or anything else is to just be theoretical. Like there's a theory that you could use tabletop role playing games in education. There's a million theories in life, but does it ever actually happen? From that, what are the things that are challenge points um, and that's what was great to be able to see that, to be able to take some of their instructional materials and share it on the website because the next person that comes along is like, I'd like to do something like that. Well, here's the slide deck, or here's um, it helps give you a leg up and it's a little faster for you to do it. And that's the beautiful thing about teaching. If we can help borrow things from each other, we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. And that's
Yeah.
what the hope is.
Yeah. So when I hear the acronym, KyEd RPG, I think it's like education or educational or something like that. But I'm looking at your little sticker that you gave me when we met at Gamma last year, and it says educators for role-playing games. So that's kind
Mhm.
of exactly what you were just saying, is that it's about the people using the resources more than like, hey, here are some resources that exist. Um,
Yeah, and it's really all the above, right? Like whether it's published materials that other people have done, websites and tools, digital perhaps, that I've discovered or others ones have recommended. It's a warehouse of all of that. But at the end of the day, I think what you said is beautiful and so right. It's human stories of actual people doing the work, and celebrating that and their stories as models, as things that perhaps inspire others. But at the very bottom line is to show that it's practical and can actually work on all the levels. And I've seen examples, everything from someone taking a character sheet to analyze a historical figure, so gamification, really, not a
mm,
game, right? Just an
right, right.
element of tabletop role-playing games, all
You
the
know,
way to a person that, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, make I can see her Harriet Tubman, make Harriet Tubman's stat block in D&D.
Right.
What
And
is
by the
it?
way, the key thing about that is that AI will do that amazingly. Tell it its system and it'll be like, sure, you want a 5e version of Harriet Tubman, good, bad, or indifferent, it can produce that. But the thing that a student can do beyond that is think more complexity and more importantly, to be able to talk and defend it. Well, here's a
Hmm.
character sheet. That's only half the battle,
Right.
to coin an 80s cartoon phrase. The
She
real
shouldn't
part
have a high
is,
charisma because like she'd be too noticeable, so she has to have a low
yeah,
charisma so that she can
you,
blend
Matthew,
in.
yes, yes, you get
That
the idea exactly.
or
So
if that's wrong or not, whatever. It's the thought behind it.
You are so right, and that's exactly it. That's the critical thinking, the real leaning into of what it really matters. What's it's not about producing a 13, a 15, a 12. It's about that, exactly that. So you have everything from those examples, character sheet, kind of the periphery, all the way up to a friend, John Brewer, who's a Jefferson County public school teacher, has a whole creative writing class full D&D. They start with rolling up a character. It's based on English standards, They build a
Hmm.
character backstory. Well, that's a set of English standards and but
Yeah.
the all these things that is literary elements and tropes and analysis and critical thinking. So it's got all the standards in there, but the adventure really throughout an entire school year, the spine of the course is Dungeons and Dragons, or in a more general sense, tabletop role playing games. So you can see the gamut, and there's opportunities for all of those things that have value. Again, it's what is the objectives of the day or the unit or the course, and how can tabletop role playing games create an opportunity for that? So that Kentucky Educators Role Playing Games site, the KyEdRPG.com, is a place that you can go to see some of those resources and stories.
Amazing. I'll be, despite having this card here on my desk for a year, I've not been there, so that all sounds fun, and I'll be going to check it out soon.
Please take a visit. Yes. Or
And
KY RPG is also on social media. So pick your favorite social media handle. You'll probably find a
all right,
KYED RPG or a hashtag of that out there too.
yeah, cool. I'll ask you to repeat all the socials for you and the things you do at the end, but
Hmm.
we got one more thing to talk about, and this kind of like brings I don't know, kind of action-y items. If you've enjoyed viewers, if you've enjoyed what we're talking about, Adam has something coming up very soon, and this is perhaps again showing the age and my age as well. I know what a telethon is, but I know how that works, and usually it's like it's on television and there's acts and there's a phone bank and you hear the phones ringing and people are raising money and stuff like that. I mean, th this is a very much like a known thing, but I don't know that I've seen one recently. So you're calling this event a telethon. What does
Yeah.
that look like in 2025? And what is your telethon that's coming up?
It's a good point. Well, there's obviously a tongue in cheek about that. I think
Mm.
tabletop role playing games has a little bit of a aspect that kind of has a little bit of a recalls back to earlier times. So there
Retro vibes
could
are
retro
frequently
vibe. Thank you.
used in to sell
Yes,
RPGs.
absolutely. Um, well, here's the quick context. So, Nerd Louisville, which is a
Mm.
501c3 charitable organization that's existed and done great work for years working with youth in the Louisville and its immediate area, reached out to me through the KyEdRPG website. And they said, "Hey, are you a charity? We would like to do some more outreach for youth, and we're trying to find partners and people." I replied back, "Hey, I've heard of you all, love your work. However, I and KY at RPG is not an official charity. It's not even an official group in the sense that there's duties and officers. It's more of an affiliation, like a banner to like rally around." I said, "However, I work with a company, OVEC, that has a educational arm that it's a charitable arm. It is a 501c3, and that is OVEF, the Ohio Valley Educational Fund. I think there's an opportunity here." Fast forward, we got together, we had a meeting, and they were like, "Well, what ideas do you have?" And the idea that I came up with is, well, what if we had a thing, and it's not like I'm the first to do this, but what if we had a thing where there was a bunch of players that came together, let's make them educators for the theme of it, and that these educational players played in front of a group, hopefully live streaming, and all in the guise of making, we're raising money for our regional North Central Kentucky youth that OVEF supports. And the premise is that we would do this in the same way like a 5K runner would. Hopefully, the players would, get the word out. Hey, I'm going to be running in a marathon, right? Well, in this sense, it's the same kind of, I'm going to be playing in a game. We got sponsors, which we got some great local sponsors of various game stores like Golden Keep Game Company, Derby Comics and Games, Glorious Games in Shepherdsville, Kentucky. We also even had Dice Alliance, another 501c3, which serves Western Kentucky. But boy, oh boy, they got excited about this and wanted to come and join the party. So we had sponsorship. And what's going to happen is on March 15th, which is a Saturday, you have two options. You could come in person at our OVEC Middletown office, or you can watch it through YouTube Live through streaming. You do not have to wait. You could donate now. But what we hope to do is do a little game mechanic that as these educators play Dungeons and Dragons, 5e edition, with Jonathan. Jonathan's been on your show, right? I'm
Yeah, I've
assuming he
talked to
has been.
Jonathan Myrie. Yeah, I've talked to
Yeah,
him.
Jonathan Myrie. Jonathan Myrie is going to be our DM. The hope is we'll give
Always
you a little game.
enthusiastic DM.
Yes, yes, yes. He's going to gamify a little element where if someone at the moment of play is willing, the first player in their name that gets a donation of X dollars, a little boon will fall,
Mm.
maybe it's a magical item or another helpful tool. So make a little fun interactive element is our hope through live streaming and in person. So all that information, including how to find the donate button, is at ttrpgtelethon.com. So ttrpgtelethon.com. You can find information for all the things, links to donate. There's a watch page where you can get information about OVEC Middletown, and eventually there'll be the live link for the YouTube streaming. So we're excited. At the end of the day, it's as I say, it's for the kids. We're excited to
Mhm.
raise some dollars in a different way, in a way that might be fun and unique, in order to help the youth and help the people in our area.
Is it is it an endurance event also? Like as long as the donations keep coming in, the play will continue, or is it a
That's a
set
great question. Well, it's
period of
blocked.
time? Like,
Well, it's blocked off. We have like a noon to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time block of time that they're going to play, and the scenario will end one way or the other. We hope the dollars don't, but we have a one-shot session that does have a beginning, middle, and end. So that's the idea.
okay, okay,
So yeah, and
Eh,
again, you don't have to wait until the day of if you want to donate, but we would love to have some live eyes on it as well, and
yeah.
hopefully be encouraged to share some fund for again, all the money, all 100% of the proceeds go to OVEF, which serves some students that need that help and love. And you can find out
Mhm.
more about our mission and the different types and programs that program serves on that ttrpgtelethon.com website.
Awesome, amazing. Thank you so much, Adam, for walking me through all that. That sounds like it's a good time. And yes, this at the time that this video goes live, that should be this coming weekend, just a few days away from when people are seeing this for the first time. So, your weekend plans have now been made. Um,
There you
Go
go.
watch the telethon. And hopefully Wet Ink will be sharing it a couple of times in between now and then. At the time of this recording, I'll share it and it'll be around. But so. Is there anything else that you feel we need to cover about this event in particular, or about what OVEF or OVEC does, or anything? Or are you ready to give us your one more rundown of all the social media links and call it a day?
I I feel like I've done the good work. There's certainly I've given you I think enough websites to hopefully go and access and look at and find some of that information. And certainly if you're interested in more, I would love to hear from you. If you have a story of how you are using tabletop role playing games in education, please reach out. Or the other side of it is I'm interested, but how? We are trying to do some professional development sessions. At the time of this airing, one would have happened in Western Kentucky, but we hope to have one in Louisville in early June. If you go to, we'll start with the KYED website. If
Yeah.
you go to kyedrpg.com, you can find, among other things, at the bottom of every page, there's a link where you can sign up for updates. That's probably the easiest way to kind of keep in the know if there's a professional development or someplace I'm going to be, or just general information about the state of, I do like a quarterly newsletter. That would be a great way to kind of keep in the loop as far as to help be aware of tabletop role playing games and education, but specifically a lot about our local area in the bluegrass. So that's kyedrpg.com, or kyedrpg is a social media handle. Again, the telethon is ttrpgtelethon.com, which we also have the hashtag TTRPG telethon. So that's another place to go for some more information. And the kyedrpg.com website also has a Gmail account that you can use to reach out to me if you would like to email me. So that is the best ways and best places, I think.
All right. All right. Do you want to, is there any way, I mean, to just, is there a link for OVEC as well if somebody wants to reach out in a more
Uh-huh.
professional capacity to
Absolutely,
get
absolutely. As a
get
digital learning
some
consultant,
consulting?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The easiest way to reach, well, OVEC, Ohio Valley Educational Cooperative, right? So it's ovec.org. That is our main website. If you want a shortcut to a Google site that talks a little bit about me and has that calendar link that Matthew was impressed with,
I
the website shortcut to get to that is ovec.org/digital learning. All lowercase, all one word, no spaces or periods or anything funky. ovec.org/digital learning. So that's where you can get to my professional side, the digital learning side of things, as well as some more resources and information and my OVEC email address.
All right. Well, once again, I thank you for your time, for talking to me about games and being an enthusiastic supporter of games in a more practical sense. I mean, games are fun and all, but like, can they change the world? I don't know, but like, maybe they can help you meet some of the education standards that are required by law to be part of the classroom.
That's right, but do it in a more engaging way, in a more exciting way, in a more deep way, I would even argue. I think you
Yeah.
can do some of those better. But let's go back to your phrase, and that's a good thing to maybe end on, which is empathy engine. In a world of
Well, it's not
today,
my phrase. I didn't
well, I
invent it. I
mean,
didn't invent it.
the one that you brought up today is beautiful. If there is a need that we have today,
Hmm.
I think that we need more engines of empathy. So if tabletop role-playing games and education or just in general can help create more of that, then I believe that there's value. If that's all that it did, I'd say it has strong value. But I think it's a little bit of a yes and. You can have that and academics and durable skills and social emotional learning too.
That's a great pitch. All right. All the links will be in the description of this video, so you can find them there. If you want to know more, if people watch this video. Um, Thanks once again, Adam, for your time today, and
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone who watched the video. Hopefully, you have learned something, and you know, maybe you could replicate this in your area if you're not from the Ohio Valley. But I'm sure Adam can help you with that too.
I would
So
love to. All the
yeah,
people, whether you're in Kentucky or not. And again, Matthew, thank you so much for having me on today.
it's been a pleasure to chat with you. So thank you. We'll see you in the next video.